Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Group Chat, Group B, on Friday, February 21st. My name is Jimmy Tominic. I'll be your host today. This is my...
Mr. Salzano here. I was reading Mr. Burmester's blog post, and I noticed that he talked about the object of pure mathematics and how that sort of formulates into philosophy. I know we've talked a little bit about the triangles and the 1,000-sided figure, but how does that formulate into pure mathematics, I guess, is my question of the day.
So basically you're wondering about how Descartes got from the triangle and the 1,000-sided figure
Right.
to mathematics.
Right, like he talks about a lot how he likes mathematics because he can see the steps, but I liked how Mr. Burmester was asking how that was just an object of pure mathematics, I guess.
Okay. That's a good question.
It's a very good
It's a
question.
great question.
Thank you guys.
It's a little difficult to answer though, because it almost seems like you're saying that Descartes' idea of mathematics doesn't follow because in this we cannot see the steps in which this type of figure is formed. Does that make sense?
Right, and Descartes is very adamant about his scientific method. And could you necessarily apply that to your question?
His scientific method.
Yes.
What do you mean by that, I guess?
I mean, he comes to believe that the scientific method is a very, very good way of deciding whether something is real or not real.
Right.
Especially because he doubts for most of this book whether
Right.
anything is real. And so the question, I guess, was asking, could you repeat your question?
Oh yeah, it was how does he see that this is the object of pure mathematics? So I think it's in class we talked about the triangle example and just the stuff that you could see, like the 180 degrees and the straight lines. So how is the rest of what he's talking about pure mathematics?
I think it relates to the imagination part he said too, only because he was able to, you might not have ever seen a 1,000 or one-sided figure before, but if you can imagine it from what you've already derived and seen things from, then it can help you get to that conclusion.
I think it also brings in the intellect aspect of the whole deal. If he's talking about imagination versus intellect, if he's using his intellect, he's going to be able to see the triangles and then use it to figure out his other mathematical issues that he brings up and when he's trying to decipher what each thing is. So.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that because he clearly says that he cannot imagine this 1,000-sided figure, but
Right.
based off the triangle, he can sort of assume what it looks like just because he knows what it is.
Right. I'm thinking that he can't I guess count in his head the 1,000-sided figure. Because when I try to imagine a 1,000-sided figure, I can see what I think to be a lot of different angles, but I have no idea of knowing if it's 1,000 sides. So, and I think that's why he has trouble deciphering the 999-sided figure between the 1,000, because they're so similar.
I also think that maybe it's just the blatant fact that his comment about pure mathematics might not follow with the triangle or the 1,000-sided figure example. I don't think it fully follows because he says on page 92, he says, "Indeed, now I know that they can exist, at least insofar as they are the object of pure mathematics, since I clearly and distinctively perceive them." But he doesn't really follow through that thought for the rest of the reading, unless I'm mistaken. So I'm not sure that Descartes even makes sense in saying that he knows everything exists because of pure mathematics in this specific meditation. Earlier, he makes great points regarding mathematics, but right now I don't agree with that because he doesn't prove it well, or he doesn't explain it at all.
All he shows is the different, he tries to argue the difference between intellect and imagination. I don't think he shows anything about mathematics in that aspect.
Right.
Alright, well, I don't think that we can currently answer this based off of just the stuff that he has told us. So why don't we go on to my other companion, Mr. Cirone's topic.
Okay, my question regards the famous saying, "I think, therefore I am." In that part of Descartes' book, he discusses the struggles of realism. He debates himself with realism. And there's a couple blog posts on this. Miss Etta, Group C, blog post 2 talks about how he's struggling with the existence of realism, but he doesn't question himself of existence and stuff like that. So my question is if Descartes is saying Descartes is saying that if he's certain that he exists, and he's questioning everything in existence that exists, does that include him as well?
Well, the whole point of his saying, I think, therefore I am, is him proving to himself that he exists, because if he weren't, to him, he thinks if he weren't able to think, therefore he would not exist.
Okay.
So he does doubt everything, like he doubts his body, but he knows that he somehow exists in one form or another.
So he is including himself with that or not?
He's doubting his physical self, but not his intellectual.
So he's not doubting that he has a soul and a mind, but he's doubting his actual body.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. I agree.
Anyone else like to chime in on Mr. Strone's question?
Well, like on page 18, he says, from the very fact that I thought of doubting the truth of other things, it followed very evidently and very certainly that I existed. So I think it's just him searching for the truth and trying to figure out the difference. And if there is even a connection between the mind and body and soul. And that relates back to dualism.
Do you want to remind us what dualism is?
Yes, it's the belief that the mind and body are two separate things.
So basically, Sean, Mr. Cirone, your question was answered with the fact that Descartes just doesn't believe in his existence of his physical body, and that's what he goes on to talk about in the meditation number 6 too.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Alright, well, I think that's enough time on that one. My question derives from Ms. Drennan's blog post number 4. She asks, if Descartes is so adamant that God is real and that we are real, how is he still unable to trust his own senses?
did you say it one more time?
If Descartes is so adamant that God is real and that we are real, how is he still unable to trust his own senses?
I think I commented on that blog post saying that I think that Descartes uses God as almost like a shield or as a cover-up, because whenever he seems to not have an answer for something, he seems to be like, oh, well, I know God has this taken care of. And I think that's just because he's afraid of admitting failure, because he, started from nothing and is working up, so to admit failure would be quite a big deal. So I think he uses God as a shield and basically just uses God to explain his shortcomings.
Do you think he ever doubted God in the process?
I'm sure he did, but he doesn't let us know that because he uses God as his stronghold, because it's difficult to doubt God.
Didn't he say in the very beginning that he would not doubt God? That he knew so well that God was an absolute truth?
But that was only one of his temporary provisions that he made.
Okay.
Yeah, but he carried some of his temporary things into his
Yeah.
I'm sure he carried some of them over, his temporary code of morals. I'm sure some of it came over into the method, and I basically think that he states that from the beginning just to kind of keep a foundation, so whenever something does seem to go wrong, you'd be like, oh, but God's got it. Just like in the meditation number 6, he does the same thing. He says that, I have never judged that God was incapable of something except when it was incompatible with my perceiving it distinctly. So he still brings up God in part 6, in meditation number 6 as well. He always brings it up when he doesn't really have much to say, and that's what I think.
Yeah, so it's like a good fallback.
I think it's a fallback. I don't think he really regards God as high as he says he does, though.
I agree that he uses God as kind of like a cushion to help him out as an extra guide, because he's questioning all these things about his senses, and it's hard to find answers when you're questioning that kind of stuff. So I think he does turn to God a lot. So.
Yeah, which brings it into the imagination point. You obviously can't see God, so you're gonna need a little bit of imagination behind that.
That's actually a really good point. I never thought of it that way.
And we also have to think about what was going on in that time period with religion, and Galileo and all that stuff that was going on. I'm not a history buff, but if you spoke out against God, you're not going to be in good standing in that society. So he has to put something about God in here because it was a big deal back then. If he was just going to prove science, he could have been expelled just like Galileo was. So I think he has a bit of a sarcastic attitude towards God as well, possibly. There isn't much evidence from the text that's my own personal realization, but I don't think he truly regards God as the highest that there is. Like we said, I think he only uses him as a cushion. That was a really good question. I remember commenting on that blog post because it was pretty good.
Ms. Pickeral, would you like to say something?
Okay, so my question, Descartes has a lot of controversy with his thoughts, And at one point, he says that he wouldn't want anyone to have the disadvantage of learning his information and interpreting it without any bias like he had. But then he said that, where is it? He wants us all to advance together. So which of these do you agree with, and how do you think it relates to the knowledge Descartes has already had and what he's trying to gain?
Repeat the two sides again, just like the two sides.
Yeah, so he's saying that all together we can further, like in our knowledge without having, like, let me rephrase it. He says with the beliefs and opinions of others, it can lead to anyone's disadvantage, like having bias from other people. And then if you're able to advance all together as a whole.
So are you asking, like, do you need bias in your life, or?
Do you think the bias helped him in discovering?
Oh, definitely. I think that even at the beginning, when he was trying to say that he doubted everything that he learned so far, he was already biased towards certain things. So I think that they helped him move on and be able to get a certain picture of like what he would like the world to be. Because if he didn't have that original bias, then he would not want to change anything.
I also think being biased sparks new questions that you're trying to ask, because if you're doubting yourself, you're going to want to keep finding the right answer towards it. So I feel like him being biased helped him open up new ideas for himself.
And I think being biased is just part of human nature. We all have our biases. We all have our assumptions, and for him to like be completely rid of his biases would be almost impossible.
Right, like,
Just as he is striving to be perfect. Sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna go off what you said, like that everyone has like their different opinions on stuff, and if you're a little more biased, you're gonna have a little more desire to get to the right answer by
And also,
questioning. So
yeah, and also there had to be some bias at some point that set him off to decide that he wanted to start from scratch and like build his new house. Like, do you guys ever think about the fact that there had to be something that made him want to do this, like something that he might have thought was wrong and that suddenly cast him into this radical doubt? Like, he obviously wasn't born, he didn't come out of the womb with this. There had to be something, some sort of bias or opinion he didn't agree with that suddenly he was like, now I'm gonna question everything I believe in, you know? And at the same time, like going off that, how difficult it is to go from nothing and make something. Like, how much nothingness did he really go off of?
Right, and I also think that going back to what Mr. Salzano said originally, his love of math played into it, because the whole purpose, I think, of this was he was talking about how every other subject that he learned about, but math was brought about by philosophy, which did not have like concrete answers, and that's not something that he personally could believe.
good point.
So basically, bias is pretty important to everything that Descartes came up with, because it had to be some sort of bias or some sort of opinion that he didn't agree with or that he sought to understand where it came from that cast him into this idea that he can come up with everything from scratch.
Right.
And that's something I think that we should talk about for a little while, is like Descartes' opinion, like Descartes, what he did in general, like how much nothingness did he really start from? Because is it really possible just to erase everything from your mind and start afresh?
Well, if he did that, he would never have been able to think of anything, because if he doubts everything, then he'd have no way of basing his ideas off of anything.
So then how did he do this?
He says that he doubted things, but through his doubt, he thought of new ideas, which spurred even greater ideas, which helped him get to the final outcome.
I think his nothingness came from the fact when he acknowledged that he might not have a body. I think that's a really big thing because it's so physical, we're so used to it. So for him to like be that and then for him to have that bias towards other possibilities is indicates that he really attempted to strive from nothingness. But again, he's human. He's a man. He's gone through so many experiences. Like, it would be very difficult to come into the situation without having any bias at all. But the nothingness of acknowledging that I might not even have a body is quite significant, and most people can't do that.
So there was, like, he started with this from something. He just doesn't recognize it because he wants us to think that he started with like a blank slate.
Right.
But there was something there already, a little bit at least.
Definitely.
And Ms. Martys, would you
Yes.
like to touch upon
My
your
question correlates with the difference between speculative philosophy and practical philosophy. mainly the portion about practical philosophy, coming from nature and using nature for our own methods and purposes, and just Mrs. Drennan's blog post from blog post number 3. She quoted Descartes saying, "After examining what were the first and most ordinary facts that could be deduced from these causes, and it seems to me that by these means I had found the heaven, stars, and earth, and even on the earth, water, air, fire, minerals, and other such things that are the most common of all, and the simplest, and as a consequence the easiest to know." Mrs. Drennan points out that perhaps Descartes here is being hypocritical because he for so long doubted the existence of all of these physical entities, and now he's acknowledging that they do exist. So my question is, also in meditation 4, he talks about how practical philosophy should be like this new thing that we all can use to really benefit society. But would his practical definition of practical philosophy be hypocritical? Does that go against all of his principles of the I think therefore I am? Does it go against what he's trying to say?
I think that he touches upon like these basic element things as like another way of dealing with God, because they are something that he knows like has to be there, because there's like a fundamental like structure to everything. And as we know today, like fire is not like something that you build stuff out of, but back then like they did think that, and they thought that God built everything. So it was just like another scapegoat for him, in my opinion, just like, oh, this has to be there just because it's always been there.
Okay.
I agree on that too. I feel like coming back to the whole God aspect of what Mr. Tominic was saying, I feel like he just bases everything off of the existence of a true God, and he uses the practical aspect of that to help explain why he thinks that God created everything. So.
He uses the example of medicine and how he thinks that we all should be educated in the field of medicine, so that we can find like a very pragmatic solution to a difficult problem. But then again, medicine, this is just an example, but do you think that through his practical philosophy he is like going away from the doubting, or is this helping him realize that his doubts no longer exist, that this might just be true? And by what means do you think it is? Mr. Tominic and Mr. Cirone said God, but do you think that it could just be him just realizing this for himself, for him looking at society and thinking, you know, we have to acknowledge some things just for the betterment of society?
I think that he probably decided that it was time to figure out something that he could go off of, and he took nature as that, because like obviously we all live in nature, so it was easiest to look at things that are concrete, he can touch them, that gets into the senses, but I think he needed something to go off of, and for this practical philosophy, he had to go somewhere. Like he can only radically doubt things for so long, you know, and especially if going back to like how times were when he was around and he couldn't be out in the world in the marketplace, he couldn't be being like, is this really an apple? Like he wasn't doing that. He had to act a certain way when he was in the world and act a certain way when he was doing this. So I think that that's important to look at too, because at some point he had to think of something, and I think that's when he came up with his practical philosophy. So
I agree. I think that, especially with medicine, you can't learn everything about medicine by yourself. You have to learn from other people too. So maybe it helped him realize that he has to take others' opinions and thoughts into consideration.
Right, but I think it's a little weird that he was saying that everyone should know everything about medicine. Like I was sort of thinking, why did he choose medicine? Because there are like a lot of other things that he could have chose, and like me personally, I'm not gonna know what half the medicines are and do, but that's what doctors and everything are for. So
I think he had quite like a radical view on medicine almost, because he wanted it. He says like towards the end of page 35 that he wanted medicine to make people more wise.
right.
You know, so I think that he like almost saw medicine. Like, he used medicine as an example, but at the same time, I think he held it to a really high esteem, because he says, if it is possible to find some means to render men generally more wise and more adroit than they have been up until now, and he's talking about that in regards to maintenance of health and medicine. So I guess he's saying that he wants to kind of start that revolution of medicine and science, making us more wise. And he's also saying that if he had better medicine, then he'd be alive longer, so he could finish off this thing. But I kind of feel like that's a thought that is kind of out there.
Well,
Right.
going off of what you said about that he wants to live longer, I think he wants everyone to live longer just so that way, like, they can sit there and prolong their life and maybe make a better impact on the world. Which goes off what Ms. Pickeral said about everyone knowing medicine, and if everyone knows it, then like I'll be able to help myself live longer, whereas Mr. Salzano will be able to help himself. So that way, instead of having to go out and always help each other, you can just focus more on like you making the world a better place through your ideas, and then instead of having to, I guess, waste your time trying to fix the problems that other people have.
No, I completely agree. He definitely was trying to do this for the betterment of society, and he says that multiple times that this is all for the common good of all men. I just think it's a little ridiculous that he thinks that medicine is something going to make us all wiser.
Well, I
Because-
think, can
No, go
I just like intercede? I think that that medicine, people were dying back then of unknown causes. There was very little information about why people were dying. Descartes is someone who just really isn't for the unknown. He really wants absolute truth, and I think that the unknown really terrifies him. So to have like this knowledge of medicine, to have like to be able to answer the question, why did this person die? Must have probably been very important to him, and he probably looked up to people who could answer those questions to some extent, and that's that correlates with them becoming more wise. And I think that practical philosophy can be used in different situations, and people then do become more wise because it's just a process of experimentation and gaining knowledge.
I agree. I think it also relates to like the advancements in medicine and then advancements in knowledge of it. So it's able to help them realize more about like gaining more knowledge and understanding things better.
Agreed.
I'm sorry to have to cut this topic off. We only have a limited amount of time left. I would like to get to Ms. Haussmann's point.
Alright, so basically my question has to do with part 6 of the method and Descartes' whole thing on how he's so scared to publish his method, yet he talks about how it also needs to get out there for the common good of all men, and how like he needs this to get out there so people can use it as a building block. So basically, and this also goes in tandem with Mr. Salzano's blog post number 3, where Mr. Salzano asks at the end, is Descartes trying to be a show-off, or is he trying to sincerely help educate others in philosophy or in science? So what do you guys think about that? Is Descartes being a show-off? Is he just unsure? Or is he trying to help others? Or is it all three?
I personally think it's all three. I think that he does like want to show like, look at me, I got this like idea, it works. But he wants to like publish it because he knows it works. Like he has done a lot of good with it, and he also admits, I can't remember where, that it's so simple, like anyone can use it because of their common sense. Like it like follows with that, and because everyone does have this common sense, it can just be helpful in better society. Like later on, it's like his legacy.
Going off of what Mr. Tominic says, like I agree. I feel like it's all three. I feel like he's using he's doubting whether he should publish it or not, just to like make it seem like he's not trying to be like cocky in what he's saying. But then again, he's saying like he's basically saying what I'm saying is right. So
Yeah, I think that these are mostly doubts. He said at the beginning that these methods won't work for everyone. These methods are working for me. These methods will not work for everyone. He made that very clear. I think that he is a man of doubt. He's been doubting this entire time. This is the basis of his book. So of course he's going to doubt whether or not he should like give this copy out to the world, because I think he understands that it's not perfect and nothing will be perfect, and this isn't like math. There's no one answer. This is just a way, and I think, and him like publishing this might even contradict what all of his other principles.
But it may help certain individuals too. Like it's not going to help everyone out there, but it's going to help like the particular few that think the way he does. And then again, like who doesn't want credit for his work? So I agree with Mr. Tominic.
Yeah, I would tend to go that way too when answering like my own question. But I even would venture to say that his method can pretty much help everyone in some sort of way, because it is a very general method that you can kind of fill in the blank. Like you're not going to take every word for word what Descartes says, but I feel like it's what he came up with is, I mean, we see it now as so natural because we grew up with it, but the people that learned by it, I think everyone can take a part of it and use something. And I think it's a very good foundation to start off of. it really quite frankly annoyed me that Descartes was all like, I don't know whether I should publish this, I'm not sure. Like, I just was like, come on. And then he did it again in the meditation number 6, he went all crazy again. But
And that's sort of why I was asked the question, because like part of me wanted to say that he was sort of being intelligent by waiting so that he could do a little more research, but then like Ms. Haussmann said, he was just like, oh, I don't think I should publish it, like almost like he wanted to keep his knowledge. But
and I also think it's really interesting that he wrote it all down and that we were able to read that part.
Right.
You know, like there has to be a point, like he wrote this. Like,
Well, remember, he was kind of locked. He locked himself in like a small cabin.
That's
He had
true.
no one to talk to, so this
That's
is probably
true.
like, the only way to keep him sane was that I'll write out all my thoughts so that I know that they're.
Yeah, I just think it's really like interesting because like I didn't think about that until right now that we're reading what he was thinking, like obviously, but this specific of these insights about publishing, the fact that the whole battle goes on the page in front of us is very interesting.
Yeah.
He wanted us to see that struggle, I think.
And also, go ahead.
The fact that he like was able to contradict himself and then go back and like even explain some of his contradictions, like I found that interesting because a lot of people don't want to admit their flaws or like the mistakes that they had thought of before.
And his reasoning is quite circular in a
Yeah.
certain sense.
And I think that it's very human as well. I think that as humans we always contradict our thoughts. And also I find it interesting how in Meditation 6 he basically asks the public to like pay for this book.
Yeah.
Which is a human thought. I would assume that everyone would want to receive some accreditation for a method or a meditation that they came up with. But I just thought that it was interesting that he wrote it down.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed.
Alright, well, that seems to be as much time as we have right now. This is Group B signing off. We will see you next time. However, it will be Group A going. Thanks for watching.